Very good. Recording. So welcome everybody. January 22nd, 2025. This is SIG API Machinery bi-weekly meeting for Kubernetes open source. My name is Federico Bongiovanni. I will be hosting this meeting today. And we have a nice set of topics for today. So why don't we just get to them? Marek, I will give you the microphone for the first two.
Okay. Hello.
And we can't hear you, or at least
you can't? Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay. Maybe it's me. Hold on. Yes, it's me.
Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to come to the meeting and share a couple of things I've been working on, maybe get some feedback and some help if possible. So I have two topics. They work nicely together. In overall, making the high-level goal is to make API server memory usage more predictable and nicer to handle. So high-level Kubernetes has the problem of not really testing or caring about large resources or large objects. We do scalability testing, but this scalability testing mostly focuses on objects that has, bytes or maybe kilobyte of size, while we officially support objects up to like even 1 megabyte, if I remember correctly, 1.5, something like this. And etcd can grow, or the objects stored in etcd can grow. And with the API that allows you to list all these objects, it can cause a lot of memory being used. And specifically, if you make multiple concurrent list requests to a large resource, this can use a huge amount of memory. And the problem is APF will not save you. There is nothing that currently can save you. The reason is it's pretty hard to do throttling and request handling with on memory, and currently APF doesn't do that. So the proposed solution is maybe we can make API server use memory wisely. So there are two work streams. First is I noticed that currently Golang doesn't have really good way to handle even large encoding of large objects. So if you have a list that has 1 gigabyte, which is technically allowed and handled by etcd, you can list 1 gigabyte of objects. Each of these lists will allocate, I think, 2 to 4 gigabytes, something like this. So if you have 10 users that make 10 concurrent requests, each of them will calculate. So I was focused on testing I think 10 concurrent requests for resource that had 1 or 1.5 gigabytes, and this resulted in almost 40 gigabytes of allocations at the same time. And because responding to these lists, even with the fastest possible client that just ingested, it takes around a minute, which is around the request timeout. We basically allocate 30 gigabytes for that stays around for a minute. And if you don't have memory like in your VM or enough, it will cause a pressure and so yeah, one thing is...
Marek, is there something you want me to put on the screen from all these links?
I think if someone is interested, they can click a link. Like the first thing, the top issue describes the problem and shows the benchmarks. I think you showed them that I did. Second one shows the PR where I'm iterating with Jordan on sensibly re-implementing JSON encoding in a way that is compatible with Golang, at least as long, and that we will be stuck with this implementation as long as JSON in version 2 in Startup Library will implement streaming encoding, and we can benchmark against that. The thing that I think Jordan requested and I've been struggling or iterating on but haven't found is how to scale tests or do benchmark testing without custom benchmarks. So currently I depend on just my local benchmarks of my custom code to benchmark it, and I'm currently the next step would be to write and use scalability test scenarios, because we don't have a scalability scenario that would test large objects and test lists. That's about JSON streaming. If there's any, Joe?
Yeah, so I mean, this is really great. The problem is super compelling, so I think this is an excellent thing to be tackling, both from a like DOS perspective and then also just from a general performance perspective. So did I understand correctly that what we're doing now is we're getting JSON streaming working with what we have, but then when go-json v2 comes out, we might adopt that, or did I misunderstand that?
Yes, they promise in their API definition, at least, similar to Kubernetes encoder interface that accepts a writer instead of just returning a byte slice. So the assumption is it will be better for streaming. We will see. I haven't dig down enough to see a discussion about streaming being directly implemented, but at that point we would have at least something that is compatible without, depending. I think Jordan was very vocal about avoiding custom implementation of JSON because it bit us too many times.
Yeah, Jordan knows exactly what's going on there. So I think his comments are on point. We can reach out to the Go team. So we do have people. Jordan talks to the Go team sometimes. Tim talks to the Go team sometimes. So we can. I think that's one follow-up I would like to make sure that we make. I can own talking to people, but make sure we go to the Go team, tell them what our use case and needs are, just so it's on their radar if there's time. The other question I had was, would we take this all the way to GA if we didn't get a V2 from Go in time, or would we hold? Do we have any thoughts there?
I think would be better, like long term would be better to the current implementation is very strict and very restrictive, so it validates a lot of assumptions about what we have in structure, and we can write some analysis about lists, how the structure definition of the list type, and we can write validation or static analysis. But I think the code, the long-term best approach to have something that is built in and officially supported by the Golang.
Okay. So yeah, that's something I'll be really interested in on how we kind of phrase that in the cap. I don't remember that section. Great. Yeah, this is good. I had one other question. Let me see if I can remember it. For scalability, do we need to work with SIG instrumentation or SIG scalability at all? Or I know you talked to those people quite a bit, Marek. Do you have a pretty quick
I think they're on vacation. They're on vacation.
Okay, that's fine.
That's my problem.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those things where it's clearly going to make things better. So just at some level, that's just really good data to show how much better it got. But then also once it becomes better, then we can also latch it and keep it from regressing. So that would seem like the secondary goal. Okay, this is great. Thank you.
I tried to run scalability tests. They don't show improvement. That's the problem. We don't cover this problem at all. The tests just don't do the requests that are possible technically. The only one thing plus one to the Golang team. The second thing is Proto. There is a separate PR, but as a next iteration is to do the same for Proto. It shows the same results. It's still fragile, but the problem is Proto doesn't support streaming, and there is no any way to do that. So again, we need to do it ourselves. Here, the problem is we don't have any promise. So from the gRPC or protobuf team, but so it would be good to talk to them too. Okay.
Mo has a hand. Mo?
Yeah, I was gonna ask, so Merrick, why can't we use the public go-json experiment, which is how they're building V2? Like I know Tailscale uses that JSON implementation in their production environments, right? So like I know the Go API isn't stable, but I think it's pretty far along, right? So yeah, like yes, we should talk to the Go team, but if their experiment currently doesn't address our use case, it might not ever address our use case, right? So um
So are you asking whether we should validate it on the experimental or we should roll it out to Kubernetes, because those are two separate things? I don't know if Jordan would be happy with rolling out with experimental.
Um, I think at a minimum we should be able to show that if we use this new functionality but built off of the experimental stuff, that whatever testing we want to do still works, basically. Um, to prove out that when that future V2 comes out that we want to use, that it's going to work one way or the other, some way. Right? And then, whatever surface area of the experimental stuff that we use, we should be able to go to the Go team like, hey, this is what we used and this is how we use it. Please make sure it's in the V2 in some way, shape, or form, right? Then I think the ask is much more concrete, and we can have a lot more confidence that whatever the V2 that it will eventually land in the standard library, we validated, right? Like, I mean, that's why the experiment exists, and it's clearly at least good enough for Tailscale's production usage. So it's probably enough for at least for us to do some pretty deep experimentation. I wouldn't probably ship it to Kubernetes customer yet, mostly just because there might be some loss of features or something, and we don't know how people use our stuff. But I do think I would probably do a lot more pre-validation before I go talk to the Go team, is I guess probably what I'm saying, right?
Makes sense.
Yeah, I like that idea, Mo. Yeah, so we actually tested out for sure. I didn't realize we were far enough along we could do that, and then we'll take it to the Go team.
Yeah, I've been following that discussion for I don't know how many years now, just the windingness of it all. But yeah, I remember seeing this really recently, and I was like, oh yeah, it's apparently you can use it now, and
That's awesome.
to me it kind of reminds me of like X crypto and all the other X libraries where like it's like production ready, you just don't get the same level of API stability. I don't know, like we depend on like a million things with no API stability, so I'm not really worried about that aspect.
Yeah, I would say if we didn't test it out and talk to the Go team now, we kind of lose our ability to complain in the future. So definitely got to do it.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. So here, I don't think, I'm not as much in a rush, even though it's smoother to move, because it's at the end, it's just a feature flagged PR that it has no cap. And I think there was some discussion that doesn't need cap, like early confirmation. On the second thing that needs caps, there is a cap that I wrote around watch cache snapshotting. I think the idea has been for very long time. I think I would count like at least 3 people that have figured out or had the same idea. High level, high level proposal is, in the last release, I have introduced a B3 data structure for the watch cache, which has very nice property of being cheaply clonable, or you can easily take a snapshot. It's a lazy snapshot that has a promise of eventually having the same performance if you snapshot it on writes. So if you don't snapshot, you get full performance of, updates directly on the tree. If you snapshot, it will require some copying, but it's just minimal number of copies of the metadata of the structure. So the overhead is very small. So I already estimated in the scalability test that the overhead is around 2% of additional memory to keep the data, to keep all historical snapshots of the watch cache in memory. Of course, it needs to be confirmed, but and I need more experimentation, but it looks very promising. I was hoping have some discussion with David, because he like from previous caps, he was really stuck on the problem of how do we debug and troubleshoot things, or how do we debug when we hide all API server layer behind the cache, and there will be less ways or even no way to access etcd. And there was a quick like previous on the consistent reads, how do we make how we can compare the results from cache versus etcd. So there is this. I think my main argument, we already can do that for watch, and I think the underlying problem is not fact that we need to troubleshoot the cache. The question why we are troubleshooting the cache, and I think that we are troubleshooting it because we are suspecting a bug or a data corruption in the cache. Because if we are caching for infinite time, it might propagate and continue and will be hard to detect. So I think one thing I wanted to discuss, and maybe I still haven't added to CAP because I wanted to have some information, whether we should think about rolling out data corruption protection for watch cache, because currently we are in the same situation. You can just debug it, but you really won't debug if you don't know if there is a data corruption. So you still don't know if there is data, if a bit flip happened in your cache and you don't know it. And we've seen situation where a bug in etcd can drop an event and cause a poisoning of the couple of API servers. So we have different API server can have different responses. I talk about this issue because it greatly combines with the previous. In my tests, if you make a exact request to API server currently, or those 10 concurrent requests, you can get API server and etcd to allocate around 60 gigabytes. If you add a snapshotable API server cache and you serve this data from snapshot, it will not need to be loaded from etcd, reducing the memory by around 15 gigabytes to 36. And then if you implement the JSON encoding, it goes down to 3.6. So it's a 20x. Like combining those two efforts can get 20x memory management improvement. The only known source of allocations that I know, at least for least requests, which are expected to be the biggest sources of allocations that take a long time, is object conversion. But this is a separate and hard problem. So as long as I think we will support object conversions, I think we would be just need to think about if we really need it or how to minimize them. But if we removed those two problems, API server memory should stay mostly around proportional to the size of etcd and not skyrocket based on user requests. And that's all of it. And if anyone is interesting, me and Madev are working on it.
There's been the topic of whether or not we really need an internal version elsewhere. So that Tim Hawken and Aaron Prindle and Yang Reglin, who have been working on declarative validation, have been asking the same question, because one of the main reasons we have the internal type, it's kind of dual purpose. One is it gives you a hub by which to do conversion. So you can always convert to and from internal, so you can get to any other type by going through it. And then the second purpose is that you can put validation on the internal type and only write the validation once. With the declarative validation project, that second goal will become much more of a non-issue, because we're planning to put the declarative validation on the version types anyways. And so I think at that point, the barriers to considering removal of the internal type change. I think there's a bunch of problems we still have to look at, but that is a potential thing we could look at in the future as an optimization as well, based on this. I think it's a really good idea.
Great. Thank you, Marek. Thank you, Joe. Okay, let's keep moving. I think Dean's either he dropped this, so we take a look later, or he wanted to join. And I don't know which one it is. So for now, let's skip it. We took a look to this list between the leads of the SIG, so we are aware. Anyways, we can follow up next meeting. Why don't we go to Mo?
Yeah, so let's see. David isn't here, and neither is Han, but Merrick, you're here, and I mean, Joe, you're here. So I don't know if we have a quorum, but I can just ask the question, right? So I think SVM is at the point now that its alpha API has existed long enough that we either have to do like an alpha 2 or do something to it such that our deletion of alpha stuff after a certain point doesn't fully trigger. And I watched Merrick your talk with Han at KubeCon, and I don't know. I just wanted to ask, like, where is our all of our heads at? I briefly spoke with David a couple of weeks back, I think, about where he was thinking, but the way he was thinking was like 100% guaranteed to be completely incompatible with the stuff that Merrick, you and Han had presented about maybe improvements here. I don't know. Where are people thinking about ResourceVersion and SVM and like what are our next steps here?
Mo, it's not that obvious to me. What's the connection between SVM and the batch transactions ideas?
SVM basically today are make in tree, and it makes the assumption that RV is a int64 or some kind of integer that is comparable.
Right.
And if we were to start trying to encode more information into that, then obviously that would break SVM. And then I think inherently, like all Kubernetes watch clients today assume that one RV change maps to one object change, not, theoretically many. So I think that's also a pretty big thing there. But yeah, it was just like I can't imagine us making a change to RV that would like break an entry controller or require some kind of rewrite or something of it. And then when I spoke with David last about it, right, he was of the opinion that we should push forward and or at least at the time, I don't know where his head's at right now. He was like, make it either, say the API is it's going to be int 64, int 128, and that's what the API is. And after we, validate all the other random etcd replacement projects, that's going to be supportable in the same level of consistency constraints that etcd provides us, then add like logic in our informer libraries, basically that if you ever see an RV that doesn't meet int64, int128, just fail. And then in a couple of releases, it'll just be impossible for anyone to ever have an RV that isn't one of those two things because you just won't be able to use our informers anymore. I mean, that's one approach, but that's very much this is what RV is, and it's never going to change because once you encode it into our client libraries and they percolate the ecosystem, it's impossible to go back.
Right.
I just don't know where we're at on this. Like that's one approach, but I don't want to build something that then we either decide to delete or remove or cut off other enhancements that other people are trying to work on. I don't know. It just feels weird.
Yeah, this is kind of the constant tension with ResourceVersion. Where I'm at is that limiting ourselves to 64 doesn't seem enough. So I feel a lot better with setting the limit at 128 and having that room in case we need to have like a higher order thing that represents the operation, and then the lower order one that's like the within a batch operation, the actual like sub operation that has happened. That gives you room to have like those two things split. I've heard of other ideas. One was like, well, you have a JSON, RV is actually like a little JSON payload, and like one of them is like, operation, and the other one is like sub operation or whatever you want to call them. That seems more disruptive. It's also more future proof, but it's a much bigger change to make. Whereas if you just go with 128, we already have a string today. We're just making the statement that the string could be a 128 in the future.
But for SVM, right, not only does it have to be like integer, it also has to be comparable. Would we still have the ability to compare them if
if it was multi-field, you'd have to define what a comparison means on that and then agree on that and publish that. Whereas if it's just a number, it's just kind of built in. I don't know. They both work. It's just different.
I'm trying to think in
approach.
my head. If I have an int 128 and like 64 bits are the existing RV, and I'm going to use that as the comparison. I mean, I guess in SVM you could just, if it was more than 60, if it was the 128, you could just drop the bits you don't care about and then do the comparison, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, it seems like we're in kind of like a undefined space, right? That we haven't decided exactly, like collectively, what we want to do with RV.
I mean, I think the one property that we need to maintain, no matter like what we do with RV and batch, is we need to improve uniqueness. So it needs to be, we need to have one RV per one object modification in whatever way you implement batch, because you break what. So I
But
agree.
how would that work, Merrick, though, right? So isn't the point of like batch to be transactional? And if it's not represented by one RV, then what have you gained exactly? Like, are you saying there would be some way to have a transaction, but then it results in like n RV bumps just for the sake of making cubes still work?
Yes. So that was the, I think in the talk, that was the idea. Can we hide either like shift the RV to add, because there is no assumption about continuous. You cannot assume continuity of RVs, because or if you had int, because you have different resources writing at different pace. You are talking just to one resource. You cannot there you don't get continuity. So if you just shift the int64 and add another, like you mentioned, 64 bytes to get 128, then you can do 100. Like in etcd you could technically do, like the limit is much smaller. I don't remember, I think 2k or something, like 1000 or 2000 transaction or operations in one transaction, so you could hide them in the lower bits. So yeah, the assumption is 64 might not be enough if we do the bit shift or anywhere to annotate the metadata about information about batch, but 128 bytes should be enough for both cases. So
Okay.
as long as we not make a decision, but agree to just not assume it's 64 bytes. Sorry, bits. Yes, sorry. Agree that it's more than 64 bits. I think that works with the proposal that Han made.
Okay. So I think, Joe, that lines up with what you said basically, right? Is that
Yeah.
if we give ourselves 64 bits of wiggle room, and that's what we codify, that it can be either in 64, or is it uint 64 and uint 128?
Yeah, it's you. I think we want to go with uint. I think.
I don't think there's any signage here that makes any sense.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of code that just uses plain int 64. So in practice, I think a lot of code can't currently support that range, but that's a little separate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if we did it that way, those two choices are there. If we codify that into our libraries, we would be okay.
Yeah, and then it would be up. It would basically be up to store. Then you get uniqueness and comparableness, and I think you're good. And then it's really up to any storage representation to decide how to use those bits. Like etcd, when I think a good example is like when a when it like does a batch check to see if there's any leases expired, more than one might be expired, and it actually creates, I believe, America, correct me if I'm wrong, it creates a batch, and so you can get one resource version for a bunch of things being deleted because the lease is expired. And so that actually breaks watch today technically, because you're not actually getting the distinct resource version for each of these changes. And so in the future, like we might have it so that like you get a distinct resource version for each of those. And you might even get some marker saying this is when the batch began, this, and this is when the batch ended. And you would have total information about everything that happened, which would be really cool. But I think I don't want to block SVM, so just going to 128 and then leaving up to storage systems to decide how to use those bytes or bits seems pretty good.
Okay, but what we were saying is that so it's either one of those two sizes, and then whatever you put in there needs to be sort of comparable as like integers effectively, right?
Yeah.
The meaning of what exists today for a 64-bit integer is the same as the meaning for the 128-bit integer. It's just
right. Yeah, if you're applying them, that's the right order to apply them in. That's the ordering. You guarantee that nothing with the lower numbers happened later than something with a higher number, stuff like that.
Okay, that's good. Cool. Then I think that's what I needed. So now I have a better sense of where we're all at. So then, like, I think I'm unblocked. So
okay, great. Yeah, thanks for getting this sorted out. Yeah, it's too bad we had discussed this once after waiting like many years, and we're like, okay, 64 is enough. We've waited like 6 years, and then like 2 months later.
Yep.
Cool.
Thank you. Okay, I think I see Austin patiently waiting for his topic. So Austin, all yours.
Yeah, thanks for the good discussion regardless. Yeah, this was an issue that I'm not really sure if it's an issue, but we observed a race condition in some of our controllers around adding finalizers. Essentially, when you add a finalizer and there's a delete call at the same time, the finalizer we think can succeed to being added, but the object is still deleted. So this can be a problem for controllers that want to add a finalizer and then make sure that they're notified if the thing is deleted and have a chance to use the finalizer for garbage collection. So just wanted to see if this is something that's been discussed before. Are we using these things the wrong way? Yeah, get the thoughts.
I mean, it sounds like a plausible race. I don't know if I've ever seen it before. Has anybody else seen this? Yeah, if not, we should dig into the exact ordering. Do you have some kind of like happens before guarantee between things? You know that like this isn't just like determinism you can't have. This is like things happened in an order where one thing clearly should have happened but didn't.
We've seen it in practice, but have not. The team who worked on this hasn't been able to put together a POC to show it yet.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, one thing that you.
Am I misremembering? I thought Jordan had a PR to like fix something around this. Am I just like misremembering? Like I know he has had that branch for like, I don't know, more than a year now, and he like always forgets to get back to it. But I thought it was related to like weirdness with finalizers. I might go try to see if I can find it real quick. And
yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, we implemented a fix on our side, but yeah, just wondering if this is something we could upstream, if not, or if Jordan could finish his branch.
Yeah, I mean, if we can either map it to Jordan's proposed fix or very clearly identify what it would take, I think that'd be a really good next step. I think the first thing would be to just see if it maps to what we already have.
Yeah, cool. All right, then, yeah, can we just assign Jordan to this or get his eyes on it?
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah,
or maybe not assign him. That doesn't seem that.
Yeah, just
okay, this is my
ask
bad
him if he
terminology.
recognizes the problem.
Yeah, fair enough.
Great.
I can probably tag Jordan to see if he has some thoughts or the work that he had in progress. Yeah, but not assign. He's busy.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. Good. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, and I think we are getting to the last one. Mika, are you still there?
I'm here.
Okay,
Yeah.
nice to see you.
So yeah, thanks. I did this last minute, but just wanted to surface this here. So I've been working on just try a new authorizer for Kubernetes using Cedar, which is an open source policy engine and policy evaluation engine and language by Amazon. Um, the and use it as a unified language for policies that are authorization policies and also admission policies. And I can do this using Kubernetes webhooks for both authorization and for admission, which works great, right? I can have a common language, which is nice. But one of the things that I'm finding, or one of the things that I found, or I guess in discussion with David, that David found, is that I do have a race condition around policy updates. So an example here would be if I wanted to permit an actor to to create a pod or something, but I didn't want them, but I wanted to add a forbid policy to prevent them from creating pods that have certain labels. I could do that with Cedar by writing a authorization policy that doesn't allow, and then a corresponding admission policy that doesn't forbid with the correct conditions. Because those webhook requests from the API server for authorization and for admission are separate webhooks at separate points in time, if the policy store where I'm defining these policies gets updated in between, I could have a request where the authorization was allowed, and then the corresponding restriction in the admission gets dropped, and the request also gets allowed when I wanted it to be forbidden. So this is just kind of a limitation of just the way that Kubernetes currently works. But I wanted to bring it up to this group because I wanted to just kind of hear from folks if this is something that's been thought about. If it hasn't been thought about, what do we think about as possible solutions for this? Not that there's a cap or anything yet for this, but I just wanted to kind of introduce the idea. Because it's going to be I think for our use case, it's going to be a real need to solve. It is an edge case, but it is something that we want to defend against. If someone drops the whole policy, we don't want that to be a worst case scenario.
I remember, Micah. Do you remember talking to David about his secondary auth Z for? He was talking about. I'm trying to remember. He had. How did it work? He had a proposal where for some operations you could basically thread through some kind of side information to track whether or not you were in a state like this. And I'm trying to remember the details. He's not here today, so it might be best to pull him in, but he had thoughts on this, and I can't remember if it was a full solution to this problem or not.
Yeah, Mo
has a gun, yeah.
Yeah, so the last time I spoke to David about this, the way we were thinking about this problem is that we would want to expand subject access review in some way, shape, or form for it to so today, subject access review can say three things. It can say allow, it can say deny, it can say no opinion, right? Those are the three states that subject access review can return. I think we would want to add a fourth state that would be allow with some condition, right? And that condition would basically be in somehow probably some maybe opaque string or something that would get passed through the stack in a way such that I guess maybe admission webhooks or validating admission or whatever could acknowledge that it handled that condition. And the way I would see the API server handling this is like, so, like when authorize your create on pod, you would say, I only allow this create on pod if this particular policy at this version is active, right? And if the API server at admission time, when it's done with all of its checks, if it sees like, I didn't handle that condition, therefore that authorization is actually not valid, and therefore I reject this request. There's a bunch of nuance there, like because you can have multiple authorizers in arbitrary orders, like we can't like terminate on allow conditionally because you might have an allow unconditionally, so you have to kind of probably keep going down the list or whatever. So there's some messy stuff there, but I think that's what we were thinking there is actually mostly like I mean, you could argue which SIG owns the KEP, but it might be more SIG auth just because it would be I think the predominant change is subject access review, but obviously it would end up flowing into admission and stuff or something like admission. But yeah, I think the biggest open-ended question is like, how do you describe the condition such that it is like easy to use with like validating admission policy or mutating admission policy, but also practical to use it with webhooks? Like, how strict is the conditional ACK? Like, can any webhook ACK anything, or does it need to be somehow scoped to particular things can ACK particular things? I don't really know. I haven't thought that through. But I think that would address your use case, Micah, is that you
Yeah.
would like basically what you're saying is I have one policy, but I'm forced to split it in two, and I don't want to split it in two. I want to have it in one place, right? And I think that will let you enforce that either the entire policy works or none of it works.
That's exactly it.
Uh,
Yeah, like I mean that solution, that idea of a solution, if there was some way to for subject access review response to include a opaque string, exactly right. Like I could have some validation in the admission webhook that says, yeah, this policy version must be required for this to be allowed.
yeah. Um, but I think that's where we're at. We kind of punted on that kept for now just because of how much other stuff is in flight for SIGAuth. Um, but yeah, if that's something you're interested in pursuing, I think there's people interested in having that capability. And I think ideal ordering would be we do that before we enhance RBAC to start supporting the new label and field selectors, because this would be another change to subject access review. So it would be weird to change RBAC, then add this, and then change RBAC again. Seems kind of annoying. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to just like make this more of a SIG-auth discussion, and then we can go back to API machinery for how do we integrate this with admission. If that
Yeah,
is that
we're
is that
happy
what
to.
you're thinking is the next best path here?
Yeah, certainly I think we need to have a discussion there. I doubt any of us has a clear idea of exactly what the condition needs to look like. So I think you're probably going to have to build a POC of like,
Okay.
I tried this and it looked like this, and then I tried this and it looked like that. And like, it doesn't have to be anything fancy, right? I think just, some branches where you patch the API server in different ways to try to be like, oh, this is what we did. I don't know, like anyone have any opinions on like how strict the binding of these things needs to be? Like super strict things could be like the authorization layer like requires like a signed assertion or something, right? Like so
Right.
like have literal crypto that there's no way to fool. But I don't know, that seems really, really heavy.
Yeah, it does. I don't know that that's what I need at this point. It may be just like a fairly niche use case so far. Like I don't know that I'm not aware of anyone who's trying to bind authorization policies with admission policies yet. But
So I
yeah.
think that it will dramatically become a bigger problem once RBAC supports label and field selectors, and then you combine that with validating and mutating admission. Like once you have all those pieces, you can basically express
Mhm.
almost any policy that doesn't require an external store to fetch like data just
Yeah.
directly in YAML. And then I think the problem becomes much bigger because it's like, oh, I can almost do what I want.
Right.
Not exactly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The
I mean,
other one.
the safe alternative for me here, if there was no change if I wanted to make no changes to Kubernetes, would be to just drop when there is a policy change, to drop the authorization change, wait some period of time, and then drop the admission policy. But that gets complicated. So yeah.
Yeah, and like if if you imagine this happening with just validating and mutating admission plus RBAC, there's going to be no ordering of like how those things get created and when they get acknowledged by the API server and whatever informer cache, right? That's not
Yep.
really a great state to be in, right? Is that like, oh, like if you created the RBAC first, then there's some undefined period where people can just create privileged pods because the admission doesn't exist.
Right.
And then there's the other aspect of, people often, and I know validating admission has made this a lot better, but oftentimes people would just overgrant an RBAC and just be like, well, I'm not going to bother restricting admission because webhooks are too hard. I'm really wanting to get away from that.
Cool. Yeah, this is super helpful. Thank you.
Joe, did we cut you off? I think we might have cut you off. Sorry.
Oh, no, it's all good. I was just going to mention that David had mentioned one use case where it's like he wanted to be able to have it where you could put RBAC on a resource basically on a field check, right? So like you can read this resource, but only if this value, or this field is set to this value. And so the auth Z has to happen like really late for those types of things. Doesn't feel like exactly the same as like making sure an admission thing is running, but there's some close relations to it. So anyways, yeah, I think pull David in and talk to him.
Yeah, the other sort of enhancement I think we need, which is I think pretty squarely API machinery, is label and field selector support for all verbs, and sort of enforcement therein. Once you have that, like today we only have it for like list, watch, and like lead collection, I think, which is
right.
That aside, right? Like if you had it for like get and create, right? Then you can pretty easily start expressing like, hey, you can create these things, but only if they would match this field selector when you created them.
Exactly.
And that seems like a very reasonable thing to be able to express and do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that David was talking to me specifically about that use case. He's very interested in that, and that's a really clear follow-up to the previous field selectors we did on list and watch and stuff, but then just extend it out to any operation. It's kind of powerful, and yeah.
Okay, sounds good. So I tag David. Looks like the conversation is going to continue a little bit in SIG-Auth and maybe come back here. Thank you, everybody. Well, I guess that brings us to the end of our agenda today. I will upload the recording later. Thank you for coming and participating. Thank you for making Kubernetes better every day. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
I have one small question.
Yes.
Someone on my team tried to post to the mailing list, but the message never showed up. Is there something I need to tell them to do to?
No, ping me. I will check. Sometimes there is security settings, and if it's the first time they post, the group doesn't know who this person is, and it's in a queue, and I might have missed it. So
All right, I'll ping you.
potentially my fault.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of the day. Bye bye.
See ya.
Well.